The people of Gaza were in an open prison. Israel controlled everything. Until when? Sinwar's plan for the 7th of October was actually an old plan. Neither Hezbollah nor Iran were enthusiastic about an operation of this size. Today, Hamas is the main negotiating party on behalf of the Palestinians.
Welcome to the PalPulse Podcast. To commemorate 2 years since Israel began its war of extermination on the Palestinian people in Gaza, we've decided to host a series of podcasts which would serve as a retrospective on the last 2 years. To start off, we will do an episode on the Islamic resistance movement, also known as Hamas. And I'm joined, as ever, by the notorious Palestinian academic and political analyst, Dr. Azzam Tamimi. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for notorious.
Well, I mean, in these last few years, maybe the media hasn't shone as much of a spotlight on you as previous decades. Yes. But your insight is, as ever, very useful to help us and our audience understand what's going on. So I think we'll just get started. Really, I'm thinking of kind of doing a bit of a timeline situation, assessing how things were and moving on to how things are today. So the best place to start might be the 6th of October. What do you think, or where would you say Hamas was on the 6th of October?
Of course, on the 6th of October, there were those who were preparing for the 7th of October.
Right.
But they were a very small circle of people. And we haven't yet heard the full story because many of them have perished and some have not yet spoken. And there were very few. But I think the rank and file in Hamas were busy about what to do about all sorts of things. Now, the general impression up to the 6th of October was that the Palestinian issue was of no more interest to regional powers, to international players. The Abraham Accords were about to invite a new member. Saudi Arabia was preparing to announce normalizing relations with Israel. And there was an impression also within some Hamas membership, as well as among the Palestinian population, that Hamas was becoming increasingly pragmatic, that it had agreed to reduce the tension between it and Israel in exchange for allowing a certain number of laborers from Gaza to go and work in Israel, as well as in exchange for allowing Qatari funding of the civil service inside the Strip. And evidently, the Israelis had earlier attacked Islamic Jihad, and Hamas did not respond. So everybody thought that Hamas has been contained, and some people were fooled into believing that it had been contained. So this was the general atmosphere on the 6th of October, and there were also tensions within Hamas as well, because there was still disagreement on what to do about Syria, what to do about the relationship with Iran, and to what extent we should be that close or not that close, etc. At the same time, the movement was really being heavily restricted everywhere. In the West, declared a terrorist organization, and in the Arab world, boycotted by most Arab governments, some of which even considered it a terrorist organization. So this was the situation on the 6th of October.
I remember when, a few years ago, I look at what's going on in terms of what's happening in Gaza. And at the time, Yahya Sinwar had recently kind of risen as the new leader in Gaza. And he seemed to be making some interesting moves. He had reportedly sent a note to Netanyahu. He seemed to have been re-establishing ties with Mohammed Dahlan, who's based in the UAE. Do you think that might have been a ruse altogether, or do you think he was maybe trying to see if there was something else he could work out?
I really don't know the answer to this question. I can only think about some explanations. Of course, Sinwar spent many years in prison. And in prison, he studied Hebrew and he studied Israeli society. And he was said to be among the few Palestinians who knew very well the Israeli mindset. Now, was he acting at times to fool the Israelis, or was he exploring opportunities? I'm not really so sure. Probably one day someone who knew him very well will write about this. But Sinwar had his admirers as well as his critics within the movement as well as outside the movement. Now, I heard from some people who are close to the movement, or who were close to the movement, that that Sinwar's plan for the 7th of October was actually an old plan that was designed not by him, but by Ahmed al-Ja'bari, who was assassinated by the Israelis in 2012. And the assassination led to the war at the time. But it wasn't as sophisticated, it wasn't as advanced in terms of the tools it used, in terms of the methodology it adopted, etc. So Sinwar will continue to be an enigma for many people because he's gone now. Of course, he wrote a novel. I'm not sure he wrote his autobiography. I'm not sure about that. But if he wrote his autobiography, and if it is found and published, then that might shed some light as well.
In terms of the leadership structure in Hamas, you mentioned a little bit earlier that there have been some disagreements, etc., and that very few people actually knew what was happening on the 7th of October. So could you tell us a bit about what the leadership structure is like? Do the resistance fighters or the armed, or rather the armed group, Qassam brigades, do they have some sort of autonomy, etc.?
Well, Hamas is a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, and the structure of the leadership was borrowed from the Muslim Brotherhood. It's just the same style. You have a Shura Council, and that Shura Council, the members are elected, and then the Shura Council produces the executive, and the executive has a mandate for a certain number of years, about 4 years. So every 4 years there are elections, etc. But when you become a resistance movement and you develop a military wing, then things become a bit more complicated. Because the military wing, Izzuddin al-Qassam, wasn't something that the movement had from the early from the first moment. It developed over the years. Initially, it was people who were sought by the Israelis. They were pursued by the Israelis, called al-Mutaradun, those who are being chased. And they started resorting to some acts, also to reprisal acts against the Israelis, against settlers in the occupied West Bank or the occupied Gaza Strip. And then that, with the passage of time, developed into a proper apparatus. I think what happened, there were some turning points in this, in the development of Hamas leadership structure. The first most significant one was when the Israelis in 1989, 1990 arrested most of the leaders. The first line of leadership, the second line, the third line, they were all gone. They were all in prison. And what happened is that Musa Abu Marzouk, who was at the time living in the United States of America, traveled, and he wasn't known. He was unknown at the moment. At that time, he traveled to Gaza and restructured the local organization and linked that local organization, to an external leadership. So the leadership moved, as of 1990, was transferred to the diaspora, to outside. And he himself headed the political bureau. It wasn't yet called the political bureau, that came really afterwards. And then he was succeeded by Khalid Mish'al in 1995, when, upon returning to America, Abu Marzouk was arrested by the Americans. Now, with the growth in the size of the military apparatus, and taking into consideration the fact that the members of Azz-e-Din al-Qassam, the military wing, were allowed to vote, they started having their say. They started having an influence. And I think this is what led eventually to the election of Sinwar as head of the local organization. Something happened before that, and that was probably the second most significant development in restructuring the organization, when Hamas decided to create 3 constituencies. Now, prior to that, there was only one Shura Council. There was one executive committee running the organization called the Political Bureau. But then, at a certain moment, they decided that the movement has grown so big that now we needed an organization within Gaza, an organization within the West Bank, an organization within the diaspora, and then an umbrella organization combining all 3 of them. And this is why this is how they ended up having elections, when possible, and if at all possible, in the West Bank, to produce a local leadership, in Gaza to produce a local leadership, and in the diaspora to produce a diaspora leadership. And then out of the elected bodies, the overarching Shura Council for the whole organization, for the global organization, would be elected. Now, there are some advantages to this structure, but there are some serious disadvantages, because you end up replicating. So the Gaza organization would have a media body, and then the diaspora would have a media body, and then you would need a media body for the overall umbrella. And the same applies to finances, the same applies to everything, apart from the military, of course, because the military was mostly on the inside anyway, and people on the outside only provided support whenever support could be afforded. So these sort of overlappings created tensions at times. A third important development happened when, after the Arab Spring, the Hamas leadership came under enormous pressure, especially the leadership in the diaspora, came under enormous leadership from their own friends as well as from within circles inside the movement, to renew for Khalid Mish'al his mandate. His mandate was approaching expiry, but then everybody said, oh, this is not the time to have an election or change the leadership, you're doing very well, etc. Some people advised against this, and some people were enthusiastic about it. My personal opinion was, and still is, that it was a disastrous decision. It shouldn't have been made, because it augmented the tension within the movement on the one hand, and it undermined the democratic character of the movement. Because in my opinion, Hamas was one of the most democratic Islamic movements. And that was not good for its image as a democratic movement. But anyway, this is how we ended up. Now, inside Gaza, people tended to favor the military, or to favor people who are associated with the military. And I think this is what led to electing Sinwar as a top, as the leader of the local organization inside Gaza. And by then, Ismail Haniyeh had already left, and he was elected as the overall leader of the movement. Now, naturally, when you have such a big movement growing in number, in terms of membership, and very sophisticated, and has international relations, has Islamic relations and Arab relations. Of course, they did establish various departments for all these things. They have an Arab relations department, an Islamic relations department, an international relations department, etc. Naturally, with different opinions regarding certain matters, this would appear to the observers from the outside as if they were disagreements. But they were not really major disagreements. They were differences of opinions, and usually they were settled in a democratic manner. But this becomes increasingly more difficult when you have a very huge body. Hamas started as few members of the Muslim Brotherhood in Palestine, maybe in the hundreds, and then ended up being in the tens of thousands, if not more.
You know, in terms of the disagreements that you just spoke about, I mean, the biggest one, as you mentioned, is probably Syria, internal disagreements. People have different perspectives on how the disagreements come about, and, you know, onlookers and commentators, etc. And you have, very interestingly, you have people who, for example, support the previous regime in Syria and support Iran, who say that the military wing is fully on board with the what's it called, you know, the axis of resistance, but really the political wing, they're a bit more pragmatic. They're always dressed in suits. They're a bit more out of touch. So you have these individuals, and on the other hand, you have people who really hate Iran and hate the Assad regime, etc., who say similarly, it's, you know, they support the fighters on the ground in the military, but the political wing, they're in cahoots with Iran, and they don't know what they're doing, and some people would call them even deviants, and, you know, they get into some interesting conversations about their religiosity, etc. What do you think brings about these kind of diametrically opposed yet identical analyses of the disagreements in the movement, and what's the actual truth behind it?
Well, it's only natural that people have different assessments of situations, and as a result of having different assessments, you come up with a different proposal, different suggestion, different opinion. That's natural. That's human nature. And it happens in every society. It happened in the society of the companions. But during the life of the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet was the arbiter. Eventually, he arbitrated and gave the final say. But following his death, these different assessments resulted at times in conflict. That's human nature. Now, in Hamas, there has been no disagreement on the vision itself when it comes to Israel, to Zionism, and to Palestine. No disagreement whatsoever. But if you are in such a difficult position as Hamas, which is boycotted and fought by the Arab governments, labeled as a terrorist organization by many Western governments, maybe all of them, its movements are restricted, even ordinary people's sympathy and support for it is restricted or is prohibited. This makes it very difficult to address emerging problems. In the case of Syria, for instance, when the Syrian revolution started, clearly this was a genuine popular revolution against a tyrant. There's no disagreement within Hamas that Bashar al-Assad was a tyrant. But the slight disagreement was about should we sacrifice all the gains we made over the years, because the Bashar al-Assad's regime provided them with accommodation, with freedom of movement, with training fields, with a factory to produce weapons, to test these weapons, etc. What should we be doing about this? The initial position was unanimous, which is let's advise Bashar al-Assad. And I'm told that this was even initially the position of Hezbollah. Let's advise him to make some reforms and punish those who violated human rights in Dar'a in the very early days. But when Bashar al-Assad rejected all those attempts, and he then refused to receive the leadership of Hamas, and whenever they asked for a meeting, he'd send a lower level official to meet them. And the revolution started being cracked down upon by the regime really brutally. The majority opinion within the leadership was we cannot remain silent anymore, especially when Iran, which is a main supporter of Hamas, was pressuring the leadership to support Assad. And if you don't want to support Assad, what are you doing there? You cannot continue to be in his country. So that was a dilemma. So they took the decision eventually to leave. There were few members who said the revolution is unlikely to win and we are going to lose, etc. But their opinion was not taken. Now, when the revolution was defeated, when the Arab Spring revolutions, all of them were defeated, and Bashar al-Assad started being rehabilitated by Arab regimes and by Western powers, Iran renewed its pressure on the movement that you have to do something. And this is when Khalil al-Hayya was part of a delegation that went and saw Bashar al-Assad, and this created a lot of tension within the movement, because most ordinary members didn't like it. We shouldn't have done it. This is what they said. Also, with regard to Iran, okay, Iran is the only country in the region that really supports us. Is it really that bad if we praise their leaders and if we hail them and if we say about one of their commanders who was killed by the Americans that he is Al-Quds martyr? That was another contentious issue. Because, okay, you can acknowledge Iran as a supporter, but you don't have to exaggerate their role or bow before them. And the Iranians were keen on this. That's why they never liked Khalid Mashal, at least since he took the decision to leave Syria. So these are the sort of disagreements that happen. And these are natural disagreements. I think what really matters is that they're always resolved in a democratic fashion. Okay, we are a body that counts 10,000 members or 100,000 members or whatever. If we have disagreements on certain issues, how do we resolve these differences? That's what matters.
There are some onlookers, or rather there's a theory that's been floating around. It's not that popular a theory, but I think it might be interesting to visit it, which states that the 7th of October operation was, in a way, a coup by the Gaza leadership of Hamas against the overall leadership. Do you think that theory has any credence?
Not at all. I don't know who came up with this idea. It's a very silly idea. And probably they came up with this idea because they couldn't imagine that many top leaders didn't know about the preparations for the 7th of October. But that's natural. This was a military operation. And the military wing was given a mandate. The military wing was given a mandate to do what it takes in order to liberate Palestinian prisoners. And in order to pressure the Israelis to end the siege on Gaza and to end the occupation in the West Bank, I mean, the struggle was still going on. It never stopped. So the military wing and the local leadership in Gaza exercised their mandate and devised that plan. Now, whether that plan succeeds or fails, that's something else. But to suggest that it was a coup against the leadership, that's a very ridiculous claim.
So the Al-Qassam brigades had a level of autonomy to act, with...
Definitely, especially if you're under occupation. And by the way, this happened in every single liberation movement. I mean, even if the ANC in South Africa, which had a military wing, the military wing leadership had a mandate. They needed to use force in order to pressure the apartheid regime to give up that sort of regime, to bring it to an end and treat people as equals. And then the results of the military operations are utilized by the political wing in order to convince the world of the justness of the cause. This happened in Algeria, happened in South Africa, in Vietnam, everywhere.
There are many Zionists who over the last 2 years have said, in response to criticisms of Israel's extermination campaign in Gaza, what else could they have done? That's what they are saying. Oh, what else could they have done, considering what happened on the 7th of October? Now, some people have responded with, okay, what else could Hamas have done on the 7th of October? Did they have any choices? So my question to you is, did Hamas have any other choices? Was there another road they could have gone down?
Remember that the siege had been going on for 17 years. The people of Gaza were in an open prison. Israel controlled everything, controlled movement in and out of human beings, controlled movement in and out of goods, of food, of medicines. And if they could control air, they would have controlled it. They controlled the sea, they controlled the air in terms of flights. They controlled territorial or terrestrial passages or crossing points. Until when should that continue? Remember also that this happened after provocations increased regarding Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa Mosque. And Al-Aqsa Mosque is a very sensitive issue, not just for Palestinians, for Muslims around the world as well. And there was the issue of the Palestinian prisoners. Israel was just taking people in, sometimes keeping them in prison for months, for years, without trial, without charges. Prisoners were being treated very badly. They were sometimes starved, denied medicine, denied lawyers, denied visitations. So, however you looked at it, something needed to be done. Now, whether the Israelis should have done less or more, I'm not going to discuss that, because my view is that the Zionists don't see Palestinians as human beings. And they said that themselves. And probably with the rise of so-called religious Zionism, they thought that this was an opportunity for them to exterminate the people of Gaza. And this is what they've been doing. It's a war of extermination. It's a genocide. So if you put any group of people, 2 million people, you put them in an open prison like this for 17 years, and you control how much they can eat, how much they can drink, and whether they can be treated for their illnesses or not, and whether they can come out or come in or whatever, eventually they will explode. And initially, of course, some people were taken by surprise because they didn't know that this was a volcano that was waiting for an eruption. But I think now, 2 years on, most people around the world understand.
Was it a preemptive attack? Was Israel planning to do something at that point?
I heard that as part of an analysis. I'm not sure. It might have been another factor.
Well, I mean, we know what happened on that day. We've heard at least those who have been keeping their eyes open, saw the videos released by the Al-Qassam brigades, Muhammad al-Dayf's statement at the beginning, and then later on there was the document that they released about why they did what they did. And I think really one of the biggest questions, I mean, it's been discussed, ad nauseum, but the Al-Aqsa flood itself, the operation, it was such a kind of a daring and consequential operation, probably the most daring and consequential operation that Hamas has ever launched. Did it go the way that the leadership had thought it might go, or did it completely go off the rails?
I think they prepared themselves well for launching the attack, but probably they did not prepare themselves for the immediate outcome. I think on the day things got out of hand because even the leaders of Hamas who planned this operation, it never occurred to them that the Israelis were so fragile and that their security defenses would just collapse like they did. When Israel's guards were totally gone, tens of thousands probably of Gazans stormed into Palestine in 1948. Remember that this is the land where their parents or grandparents hailed from. The area that people call Israel was Palestine before 1948. And there were so many villages, hundreds of villages and towns that were destroyed by the Israelis after removing the Palestinians from them or forcing them out. So people thought this was the day of liberation. And that's why the majority of Israeli hostages were not taken by Hamas or Islamic Jihad. They were taken by ordinary people, especially the elderly and the young. My understanding is that the Hamas operation was designed to take hostages from among the military personnel deployed around Gaza. And there were several bases the Israelis had there to protect their kibbutzes and the various villages they built on the ruins of the Palestinians since 1948. Not only that, most of the Israelis killed on the day were not killed by the Palestinians. They were killed by the Israelis. Because the Israelis panicked. They brought in their helicopters. They brought in their tanks. And they enacted their... what is
the
it?
Hannibal Directive.
The Hannibal, yes. Which means that it's okay, you can kill our own in order to kill the others. Initially, of course, the Israelis claimed that all this mayhem was created by Hamas, and they continue in their propaganda to say this, and those who support them continue to claim this, but the facts are completely different. The fact is that the Israelis went into the kibbutzes and the villages in order to hunt down the Hamas fighters, and in the process they killed their own citizens.
Yeah, I mean, something that's so emblematic of the way that the Israelis lie is the fact that Hamas have admitted that there were mistakes made that day, and they have welcomed an international independent investigation. But the Israelis have never allowed it. Yeah. But that being said, the question still remains, why didn't Hamas anticipate ordinary people from Gaza, trying to make their way into Forte Palestine? Why did they, for example, if their aim was just to take captives from the military installations, why did they continue further in? Why didn't they just take the captives and head back home?
Yeah, this was the plan. It was the people who went in. I think the Hamas leadership that planned the operation did not think that the fence would come down so easily. And that there would be no Israeli troops to guard the borders. Because apparently the Israelis, first of all, the Israelis were having a 1 week festival.
Right.
So many of them were on holiday. And they had redeployed some of their units to the West Bank because they were anticipating troubles in Jerusalem and elsewhere. And Hamas doesn't have the resources to control all this line dividing the two sides. And I think there was a sense of euphoria on that day. Everybody was jubilant and seeing the Israelis suffer in this way or being defeated in this way, in such humiliation. Many people celebrated on that day.
But the Al-Qassam brigades did go further than just the military installations. They didn't. The actual military wing of Hamas didn't just stop and go back. They did go further into the kibbutzes, etc. So that's my question: is why didn't they just turn back?
I don't know. I don't know the details. I have no idea.
Do you think that Hamas were expecting a stronger response from their allies in the region, from Hezbollah and Iran specifically?
That's another question that is difficult to answer. Because according to the New York Times, who published excerpts of a document the Israelis claim they found in one of the tunnels in Gaza, the minutes of a meeting attended by Sinwar and a few other individuals who are with him in planning this operation indicate that neither Hezbollah nor Iran were enthusiastic about an operation of this size. Because they were not told what was being planned. It was just hinted to them that if something like this happened, or if we were to do something, and apparently it was a lukewarm response from the Iranians and Hezbollah. Iran is a state, and a state thinks like a state, and Hezbollah is under Iranian authority, and therefore would only do things if Iran permitted them. So my sense is that most probably some people were disappointed, but not those who did the planning.
To all of our viewers who might be a bit confused by the costume change, we've had to film this episode over a couple of days due to time restraints. But carrying on from where we left off, the resistance movement, politically speaking, did they have any plans that had to get scrapped as soon as, or any things in motion that had to get scrapped as soon as the Al-Aqsa flood operation commenced? What would you say was the ramifications politically in the immediate aftermath of the flood?
I don't think we have anything written or documented in any way about the thinking of the planners of the 7th of October attack. I think most probably they just wanted to stir up the waters. They wanted to revive the cause, perhaps. But above all, they wanted to capture some Israeli soldiers in order to exchange them for Palestinian prisoners. Now, to what extent they had discussions about the likely repercussions, we don't know. I haven't seen anything myself.
Now, many of the leaders were assassinated over these last 2 years. I want to actually maybe talk a little bit about a few of them individually. But to start that off, what are the effects of the assassination of leaders of a movement such as Hamas?
Well, naturally, in any human organization, the removal of a top leader has an impact. But I think in Hamas, they are among the probably few organizations that we know of who prepare themselves for such an occurrence. And that is simply because this has been the history of the movement. Since it was founded in the late 80s, the Israelis have constantly targeted their leaders and assassinated many of them. Within days, they assassinated the two top leaders in Gaza. First, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, followed by Dr. Abdulaziz al-Rantisi. Prior to that, they assassinated several senior members. They assassinated several afterwards. The way the movement is structured, it is structured in a way that mitigates the impact of such elimination. Because it consists of institutions, it consists of departments, and each department has some sort of an autonomy. And lower ranking members are always trained to ascend and occupy the positions of those who are more senior to them if they are no longer there. So we haven't seen the assassinations impact profoundly on the movement.
I'd like to go through a list of some of the most prominent leaders who have been assassinated over the last 2 years. And maybe if you could give us a bit of insight into who they were, what role they played, what impact their loss was on the movement. We'll start, I think, with who might have been one of the earlier assassinations, was Saleh al-Aruri. What can you tell us about him?
Well, Saleh al-Aruri was the head of the West Bank constituencies. The Hamas consists of 3 constituencies, Gaza, the West Bank, and the diaspora. And when he was assassinated, he was in charge of the West Bank organization, but at the time he was in Lebanon. And he joined the movement at a very young age and spent time in detention by the Israelis. I met him once personally, maybe more than once, but once I was interviewing Ismail Haniyeh, and I was invited to lunch, and he was there at the lunch. So apart from that, I don't really know him personally. I don't know much about him.
And do you feel like that, I mean, you spoke about the institutions, etc., but in a situation of war, is that impact felt a bit more? You know, when a loss such as, the head of, a whole branch?
Perhaps momentarily, but then the movement has the capacity to compensate.
Speaking of Ismail Haniyeh, he was also assassinated soon after Saleh al-Aruri. You said you met him. Well, what can you tell us about him?
Yeah, I knew Ismail Haniyeh better because I visited him more than once in Gaza. I met him several times outside Gaza when he left and stayed out on the outside. I met him when he was the leader of Hamas inside Gaza, and then when he became the leader of the entire organization. Ismail Haniyeh, my knowledge of him goes way back when he was managing Sheikh Ahmed Yassin's office. And I remember when Sheikh Ahmed Yassin was about to embark on a tour, I contacted him to arrange for some interviews with journalists, etc. Prior to that, of course, he was among the 410 Palestinian activists and leaders who were deported to Lebanon, in South Lebanon in 1992, and at the time he was a young man. And he's an example of how the movement ascends its members and compensates for the loss of senior figures. I mean, from an ordinary member, he ended up being the head of the movement. He was a scholar in his own capacity. He knew the Quran by heart. He usually led prayers during the month of Ramadan. He had a very nice voice. And he was softly spoken and very gentle with his fellow members. And I think it was a big blow to the movement initially when he was assassinated, mainly because his assassination wasn't expected to happen in Iran, in a country like Iran. I mean, if you are the guest of the state, you assume that sufficient security is provided.
Was it expected at all, considering that he was the head negotiator?
It wasn't expected, first because he was the head negotiator, and also because he was in Iran at the time. But the Israelis can go to any length to eliminate those they consider to be their enemies. And of course, his assassination proved one thing. It proved that Netanyahu wasn't serious about negotiating. And this is exactly what Netanyahu did much earlier in 2012 when he ordered the assassination of Al-Jabari. I think it was Netanyahu at the time. Yes, it was Netanyahu. And Al-Jabari was also negotiating a deal with the Israelis when he was assassinated. Al-Jabari wasn't the top leader of the movement inside Gaza. Ismail Haniyeh was, but he was the head of the military wing at the time.
What does it say about the movement that, despite being constantly targeted for assassination, especially the negotiating teams, most recently in Doha, they keep going back to the table to negotiate?
Well, you have to negotiate. You have no other option. In any war, in any conflict, eventually you have to negotiate. That's natural. It's not a question of going to the negotiating table. It's a question of what you are prepared to concede. And I think Hamas has proven one time after another that it adheres to its principles and it keeps its word. Unlike what we saw in Fatah, for instance, and what happened to Fatah and the PLO as a result of going to the negotiating table.
A few more of the leaders that were assassinated I'd like to go through. Marwan Isa. What can you tell us about Marwan Isa?
I really don't know. The rest of the list you have, I don't think I know any of them.
Well, I mean, in terms of maybe their role and...
because Marwan Isa was in the military wing, and these people are not usually public.
Right.
So you wouldn't know much about them. I'm sure there are people who knew them very well. But personally, as a researcher, I never had access to these people.
Okay. And that would include Mohammed al-Daif as well?
Yes, same.
What about the final person on my list who wasn't actually assassinated, actually killed by happenstance? The Israelis were caught off guard, and that is the leader of Gaza and then leader of the overall movement, Yahya Sinwar. Well, what can you tell us about Yahya Sinwar?
The same, Yahya Sinwar, I don't remember ever meeting him. I don't know if I met him without knowing him during my visits to Gaza. But he is a very famous individual. That's because he spent so long in prison, in detention, and because while in detention he really worked well on himself. He studied Hebrew and he studied in the university and he acquired a degree. And then he became a very popular fellow inside Gaza, to the extent that he was elected to the top leadership position, despite having been recently released. He's become some sort of an icon, even in his death, because of the way he was killed by the Israelis. But personally, I knew very little about him. Of course, he wrote a novel. So some people thought he had a potential there. And I think after his assassination, his novel was translated into so many languages. I don't know whether it was just before or after. And he is believed to be the main figure in the planning of the 7th of October attack.
Even though he's not the military head?
Well, he was the head of the movement. The head of the movement has direct access to the military wing.
Right. And so it's the coordination between the political side and the military side is much more cohesive than some might think then? Inside
Gaza, yes, definitely. Inside Gaza. The leadership on the outside, no. The leadership on the outside, they have their own functions. And there is a degree of autonomy in every one of these functions.
So the leadership of the overall movement are outside Gaza, apart from a small window from when Ismail Hani was assassinated to when Yahya Sinwar was killed. It was inside Gaza. Yahya Sinwar was the leadership. But overall, they're outside Gaza, right? But at the same time, even though the leadership of the movement are outside Gaza, they don't make the decisions when it comes to the war. Right? They defer to Gaza. Can you talk to us a bit about this dynamic?
They don't make decisions regarding the final say in the ceasefire negotiations.
Okay.
But of course, the top leadership of the movement is the top leadership of the movement. But it is the local leadership in Gaza that has the final say when it comes to what sort of conditions they're willing to accept in the negotiations. I mean, it goes before saying that the outside leadership wouldn't decide on behalf of the people of Gaza. Because it's the people of Gaza who are suffering and who are enduring. So this is how it is. Whenever there is a round of negotiations, like the one that led to today's announcement of concluding a deal, the outside coordinates with the inside. And that's why usually it takes some time, because they have to communicate what they have and wait for communications to come back to them.
We spoke earlier about the tensions that rose inside the movement, especially with the war in Syria, and some have attributed this, or they have said that this tension was kind of like an inside Gaza, outside Gaza kind of thing. The situation inside Gaza is a bit different, and those who spend time outside Gaza might have a different perspective. I don't know how much of that is true, but what would you say has happened to these tensions since the war started? Have they subsided? Do they still exist?
First of all, any human organization will have tensions within it. That's only natural, because each human being is an entity by itself, and therefore we have our own views, we have our own assessments, and we have our own ambitions as well. I think since the 7th of October, the movement has been more united than ever, because especially since Israel started its attack on Gaza, there was only one vision, there was only one objective, and that is to defeat Israel's purposes. The Israelis wanted to crush the resistance and depopulate Gaza. And everyone within the movement was adamant that neither of these objectives should be allowed to happen.
Now, the movement itself is not the only kind of faction in the Palestinian resistance. There are other factions that they deal with directly that they are, quite friendly to, such as PIJ, and maybe not so friendly to, such as the Fatah movement. But sometime in 2024, there was an attempt to bring together the factions, and it happened in China. And there was something signed, and promises supposedly were made, but unfortunately nothing came of it. But what would you say was the situation between the factions prior, and how do you think that has developed since the Tufan al-Aqsa operation?
Well, there are two types of factions. There are the factions that join in the resistance, and there are factions who are collaborating with Israel against the resistance. So the first type is very good cooperation and coordination, especially the PFLP and the PIJ. Now, any meetings or talks involving Fatah, Hamas, as a matter of principle, doesn't say, no, we will not come. They go, they attend, they maintain their position. But in every single one of these meetings, since I remember them, I think the first ever was in 2005, ended in failure. And that's because the Fatah movement, or the PLO, or the Palestinian Authority, they coordinate directly with the Israelis and would only be allowed to accept what the Israelis permit them to accept. So every time these so-called reconciliation or reunification meetings ended in utter failure.
Mm-hmm. What do you think? I mean, I don't want to delve into too deeply because it's a bit off topic. But what do you think is behind that? The fact that the Fatah movement isn't willing to deviate from what the Israelis allow. I mean, like, at the end of the day, Hamas was still able to get funding, through whatever channels prior to the 7th of October attack. So losing out on, certain, certain funding, or losing out on certain privileges, surely that can be taken on the chin in pursuit of some sort of unity.
Hamas never depended on the PLO for funding. Mm-hmm. If that's what you mean. Is that what you mean?
I mean, I know that there was a boycott of the PA government when Hamas was the ruling party,
yes,
in 2006, right? And that's partly why, or partly explains why, the Fatah party and Mahmoud Abbas kind of went the way they went in 2007. But Mahmoud Abbas has seen over these last 20 years that the Israelis are not going to budge. They're going to keep taking land. Surely, just having Palestinian unity, even if the Israelis come down hard in some way, surely that puts him in a stronger position.
See, the PLO, when it entered into Oslo, it agreed to transform itself into a security organ working for the Israelis. So that's the deal. And that's why they cannot escape the reality they themselves allowed to exist. Now, their existence inside the West Bank and in Ramallah is dependent upon the Israelis. If the Israelis don't want them, they can easily dissolve them and throw them out. They allowed them to come in because that was the only way to extinguish the first intifada, the first uprising, and also avert whatever potential threat they believed Hamas was posing to them. Unless you understand this situation, it's difficult to really comprehend what's going on, because the PLO is supposed to be a liberation movement. Fatah was supposed to be a liberation movement. And these people who are today leading the PNA in Ramallah were supposed to be members of a liberation movement. Yet, they are part and parcel of the occupation. Despite all of this, Hamas was hoping that the events witnessed by the Palestinians over the past 30 years or so since Oslo might motivate these people to change their position. But I think it's impossible for them to do this because they learned a lesson. They learned a lesson from Yasser Arafat. When Yasser Arafat thought of changing his position vis-a-vis Oslo, the Israelis eliminated him. So the Israelis can eliminate Mahmoud Abbas. They can eliminate anyone working for the Palestinian Authority if they want to. And this is exactly what they did with some of the members who went against their leadership in the Palestinian Authority and joined the resistance. Now, Oslo brought the members of the Palestinian Authority a set of privileges, they and their families. And they cannot live without these privileges. They've become very rich. They lead extravagant lives. They're involved in all sorts of business deals personally, at the expense of the Palestinians, of course. And not only that, they employ thousands, tens of thousands of Palestinians whose families have become dependent upon the Palestinian Authority and hence upon the occupation. This is what the Israelis call the new Palestinian, someone who is not bothered by the occupation, is not bothered by the slogan of liberation or the right of return, and is willing for a salary to serve Israel. So you have an army of collaborators. The Palestinian Authority is nothing but an army of collaborators.
There's so much I want to get into, but unfortunately we are running out of time. So I want to focus on the most recent developments. Now, we had a conversation last week about the deal that Trump put on the table and how ludicrous it seemed at the time. However, Hamas have signed on to at least an initial phase of some sort of agreement, which includes the release of the Israeli captives in exchange for Palestinian captives, as well as the ending of the ceasing fire, essentially, and withdrawing Israeli troops to a particular point. Now, before I get into the details of the deal itself and your position on the deal, I wonder if you can comment on the fact that Hamas are at a stage today where it's no longer sufficient for the Israelis to be dealing with them through the mediators, of course, but rather the Americans have to get directly involved. What would you comment about this?
Well, the Americans have been dealing with Hamas for the past few months. It's not the first time, and they met them directly in Doha. They sat with them and had discussions.
Is this the meetings that happened in 2024? Are these the first time that the Americans have met with Hamas?
Well, there were very old meetings a long time ago in the early 90s in Amman, but that was at the time American diplomats meeting with Hamas in Jordan. No, yes, you're right. This is what we're talking about since the war started. And I think the reason for this is that Trump is not a conventional figure. He's not a conventional politician. He doesn't have taboos.
Right.
And okay, he said to himself, what the heck? We'll go and meet with these guys and talk to them. Actually, he tweeted this morning that Israel and Hamas have agreed. So he's even talking about Hamas as a main party that you have to deal with. And that's an important message to the world, because governments that proscribe Hamas are silly. They are really silly. Because if Hamas is the main party in the resistance, and if you want to work out something, you have to deal with them. And they are silly also because they don't learn from history. The ANC once was considered to be a terrorist and proscribed, and it ended up ruling South Africa. And they had to deal with it, and they had to deal with Nelson Mandela. And the time will come when Hamas probably, or someone like Hamas, will rule Palestine. So it's a very silly position on the part of the British government and other European governments to proscribe Hamas.
As an onlooker myself, when I'm looking at the situation, if I can compare it to something, I would say it looks like the emperor, Trump, is looking upon the situation in a faraway land, and he's seeing that the regional governor can't take care of this himself, or can't be trusted to deal with himself. So now this so-called ragtag group of resistance fighters in sandals, so to speak, are now having to deal directly with the emperor, which is, quite a leap forward in terms of their political and global influence. Would you say that? Would you say that's...
Yes, that's one way of putting it. There are several ways one can describe what's going on, because it's not a conventional situation.
Now, the deal itself, it's not. I don't think it's gone into effect yet. But I'm assuming it's going to.
It was supposed to go into effect midday Palestine time.
Okay.
But the Israelis postponed it until their cabinet met and voted on it.
Okay.
And that's why when some Palestinians after midday started moving north, Israeli tanks fired on them.
Mm-hmm. So the Israelis, as usual, they wait until the last second, they increase...
Israelis are compulsive liars. They are deceptive. They cannot be trusted. They are war criminals anyway.
So, as in, okay, we see that the appeal of this deal is to get a bit of respite, maybe for the people of Gaza and for the movement. But do the negotiators and the leadership believe that it will hold?
Well, they're giving it a chance. They're giving it well, how do you describe it? They're giving it a go. They're giving it a go. I imagine the following scenario. I imagine that when they met in Sharm el-Sheikh, they had two sets of plans. The original plan that Trump discussed with the Arab and Muslim leaders, and which they blessed at the time, and the plan as modified and manipulated by Netanyahu, Kushner, and Witkoff. And Hamas cleverly did not say yes or no, but endeavored in the negotiations over the past few days to get them to focus on the major elements in the original plan. The ceasefire, stopping the war, withdrawal, prisoners exchange, and allowing aid in. Hamas ruled out demilitarization. It has not commented on the proposed foreign administration. And it seems this is appealing to the Americans because Trump is desperate. Trump wants the Nobel Prize, the Nobel Peace Prize.
Okay.
And he wants this peace deal to be signed. Now, bringing in the Qataris and the Turks, it was significant because they didn't want to leave the Egyptians on their own. I don't know who had a say in this. Most probably the Americans had a final say, but maybe it was Hamas's wish also for the Qataris and the Turks to witness the negotiations and witness the signing. It adds some strength. It provides further guarantees. That's all possible.
But we saw that there were guarantees in the previous ceasefire agreement that was in earlier this year.
No guarantees. No, there were no
guarantees.
No real guarantees, really.
Okay.
It was just a deal. The Americans approved. The Israelis reneged on, and the Americans did nothing about it. But I think today, if the Israelis do the same thing, the Turks and the Qataris, and with them the Egyptians most probably, likely also all 8 Muslim and Arab countries that met with Trump, were they 8 or 11, I don't remember, all of them will come out and say the Israelis are clearly in violation of a deal that everybody wants to see implemented.
Now, with regards to the future of this deal, Hamas have made it clear they're not going to give up their arms. The Israelis have made it clear that they're not going to accept a deal in which Hamas doesn't give up their arms. So,
well, they've already accepted.
So is this
they've already accepted?
Okay,
they've accepted, but they've accepted a phased out process.
Okay.
So we have now, today is supposed to be the first phase. There will be the phase of prisoners exchange will begin on Monday, likely. So it's going to be in stages. Hamas has been very clear about laying down the arms. They said we would do this only if there is a legitimate Palestinian Authority in place. Not to the Israelis and not to an international commission of some sort.
And Trump, you think, is going to go along with this?
He hasn't objected so far. I mean, his language of threatening Hamas is no longer heard anywhere. I think he's changed his tone. Of course, he's praising Netanyahu and praising the Israelis because he wants this to go on. He does, and I think he's also using the families of the hostages as a backup. So he's communicating with them. He has spoken to them, and they invited him to come and address them, etc. So this is all building a pressure on Netanyahu and his coalition government.
So at this stage, you believe that there are multiple parties who genuinely want to see this end as soon as possible? That's
how it looks.
I think, unfortunately, since we've run out of time, we have time maybe for one last question. And so obviously it's always a pleasure to be speaking to you, and I could pick your brain for hours. But at this stage, where we've witnessed 2 years of genocide, the movement has, expended a lot, leaders as well as fighters. The world has changed drastically. You've got changes all over the world, and even in the region, in Syria, etc. Where do you see the movement is today as opposed to where it was on the 6th of October 2023? And where do you think the future might lead to?
There's no question about the fact that the movement has militarily been weakened. Yet, politically, it has been strengthened. Today, Hamas is the main negotiating party on behalf of the Palestinians. Today, Hamas is recognized by those who proscribe it as the player that matters within the Palestinian scene. Hamas today is a lot more acceptable to the public around the world. People saw genuineness in Hamas, in its resistance, in its persistence. And I think whatever material that Hamas lost can easily be compensated, because the moral gain is what matters, and the moral gain has been great, has been enormous. I'm told that there was a recent poll that shows Hamas to be the most popular faction among the Palestinians, despite everything that has happened so far.
Dr. Azzam, it's been an absolute pleasure as always. Thank you so much for joining us.
Welcome.